In this experiment, we are going to be testing the effect of sugar, which is an energy storage molecule, on the reproduction of the yeast. We're going to be testing that by using 3 different jars and putting about a tablespoon of yeast, or 1 packet worth, in each of these jars, along with a different amount of sugar. So in one jar, we're not going to add any sugar. In another jar, we're going to add a pinch of sugar. And in the last jar, we are going to add 1 teaspoon of sugar. I'm going to go ahead and start by adding my sugar into the 2 jars. A pinch of sugar, I'm just going to use 2 fingers and my thumb. I'm going to grab a little pinch. I'm going to add that right into the jar. This jar calls for 1 teaspoon of sugar. So I'm going to, again, use that teaspoon measurement. This time I'm going to measure it out, and you'll see that that's quite a bit more sugar than the pinch of sugar. So the jar that has 1 teaspoon of sugar has a lot more sugar in it. Now I'm going to go ahead and add 1 packet of yeast into each of these containers. So now I'm going to go ahead and add in some water, because in order to activate that yeast and take it out of its dormant state, we do need to add water. So I'm going to go ahead and add that water in, and then each one is going to get stirred. It's important that we use 3 different stirring sticks because we don't want to contaminate any of our experiments. And start. So once again, we are trying to see how the sugar that we've added to the yeast and the water affects the reproduction of the yeast. The sugar is an energy storage molecule for the yeast. They're able to obtain energy from it, and we are going to see if more sugar leads to more yeast reproduction. So we're at just about 6 minutes. Let's take another look. You can see lots of bubbles. It's really foamy looking. This one, the foam isn't covering the top quite as much as it is over there. This is the jar I'm showing you right now, has 1 tablespoon of sugar. Or sorry, 1 teaspoon. This one just has a pinch. And then if we look over at the jar that had no sugar, we don't see nearly as much foam there. All right, let's keep observing. So I want to show you just how thick and foamy some of this stuff is. And all of that foam is representing the yeast that has reproduced. So when I swirl that, I hope you can see it's not really moving that much because it's so foamy. Here's the one that had 1 pinch of sugar. So again, still really foamy. We can see all those bubbles. But when we look over here at the yeast that has no sugar added to it, wow. It's almost just like it's just water. There's no foam there at all. All right, so 15 minutes have passed. So right off the bat, when we look at it from here, we can see that this jar right over here that had no sugar in it clearly has much less material inside of it. It's not taking up nearly as much space. This one in the middle had 1 pinch of sugar, and this one on the right-hand side had 1 teaspoon of sugar, I'm sorry. Another thing I want to point out that you can see really clearly right there is all of those bubbles. All of those bubbles are indications of that yeast reproducing. So this is the one that had 1 teaspoon of sugar, and here's the jar that had 1 pinch of sugar. So both of them have those bubbles. Let's go ahead and take a look at it from the top. So I brought some spoons so we can go ahead and dip in and see what this stuff is like. So just look at that. If you've ever had a cappuccino, this seems like the foamy milk that's on top of your cappuccino. So again, it's super foamy. You can really see all those bubbles. That's awesome. And then in our last jar, it's just a soupy, watery. It's it's not nearly as foamy as the other two. A couple more minutes have passed. So again, here we have the jar with no sugar. Still nothing is happening with that yeast. There's the one that had only a pinch of sugar. And here we can see that jar that had 1 whole teaspoon of sugar has started to show a lot more growth. So think about why that may have happened. Why did it take so long for the jar that had more sugar in it to actually reproduce more? It's because when we checked at 15 minutes, they were pretty much level. And now we can see that no sugar is really small, pinch of sugar is in the middle, and then the one that has 1 teaspoon of sugar is much, much higher. We're about 30 minutes into the experiment. So again, here we have the jar with no sugar. The yeast is still super watery. Here we have the jar that has only a pinch of sugar in it. We can see that it's still nice and really foamy, just like on top of a cappuccino. And here we have the jar that has 1 teaspoon of sugar in it. So I'm gonna let them all sit side by side. And this is where we can really see the difference. So again, jar with no sugar, jar with 1 pinch of sugar, and jar with 1 teaspoon of sugar. And so this is after roughly 30 minutes of letting the jars just kind of sit there. I have stirred them a couple of times, but I have stirred all of them the same amount. I hope that you're also thinking about why that jar that has 1 teaspoon of sugar in it took so long to rise and overtake the one that had just a pinch of sugar in it.